Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is HarrisX CEO and founder, Dritan Esho. Dritan, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me back, Brittany.
Of course, there is, like you said earlier, never a dull moment in politics. That's certainly the case this week. On Sunday, we saw President Joe Biden drop out of the 2024 presidential race. Within a few days, Vice President Kamala Harris became the likely Democratic nominee. And now Forbes and HarrisX has a poll head-to-head matchup between former President Donald Trump, Vice President Kamala Harris. What can you tell us?
Well, we went to field on Monday for 3 days to really look at how Vice President Harris would reset the race, if at all. And what we found is that she significantly narrowed Trump's post convention lead. If viewers might remember, after the convention, in our post convention poll, Trump was up by 8 points with regards to Biden. And then when you factored in undecideds, he was still up by 6 points. And then when you compared him to Kamala Harris, he was up fairly significantly, 9 points without factoring in the undecideds. And when you factored in undecideds, that number went up into a double-digit lead of about 11 points. When we look at the state of the horse race today, we can say that Harris has momentum. And right now, the horse race, Trump is only up by 2 points, 49% to 47% compared to Kamala Harris. And he only about up 3 points with likely voters. So her rollout has been quite strong. And you could say that it has reset the race where to the point where it's now a very competitive race again, at least based on the national polling that we have done.
So it reset the race, and I am curious because she did narrow the lead between Trump and the Democratic challenger. What are her new strengths?
Great question. So again, up until now, one of the weakness of the Biden campaign was suburban women. And suburban women made up a large part of the undecided group of voters, roughly 10 to 12% of voters that stood in the middle. Harris has managed to turn the position of Democrats on undecideds in general, both independent undecideds and suburban women that were part of the undecideds, but actually it is very competitive with suburban women in a way that the Biden campaign was not. And now she's winning suburban women by 12 points. And that's a fairly significant strength for her campaign compared to President Biden's campaign. So that's where we've seen a clear strength from Kamala Harris. She's also consolidated Biden's vote or Biden's coalition. She's winning 95% of all of the voters that said that they would vote for Biden, with only about 3% breaking rank and about 2% being undecided. But, some clear momentum, especially with women. Now, Vice President Harris has some challenges. And one of the most interesting challenges that we're seeing in the polling is that she's fairly behind with African American men. And she's winning 65% of African American men and losing 35% of African American men to President Trump. In this regard, President Trump is doing quite well still with African American men, 3 times better than what he had in the 2020 election. So the question is, are these African American male voters, are they going to go home to the Democratic Party and become part of Kamala Harris's base? Or is Trump actually giving them a better vision for the future and speaking to them in a more convincing way about the issues that matter to them? And this is something that is to be seen and should be tracked very, very closely.
I know Vice President Harris has only had a campaign for really 5 days now, but if you're comparing them side by side, Biden's campaign versus Harris's campaign, does Vice President Kamala Harris have any new weaknesses that the Biden campaign did not?
Well, the easy part was that she took off the table questions of age and fitness for office. The difficult part is really that voters don't know Kamala Harris as well as they know Donald Trump. And while she has a very high name ID or very high recognition, they are still not confident on what she stands for on a whole array of issues. So the next few weeks will be essential to Vice President Harris's campaign, and will determine where the polling stands. If she moves to the center and she goes after swing voters, she is likely to sustain the momentum that she has. If she goes towards her base and more moves more to the left, then that can present challenges for her campaign. So really, there's a lot of known unknown and new factors for both the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign. And I would say that the polling isn't going to settle for another couple of weeks until we have some real issue based positions on the table from both of the campaigns and we see what the new dynamic is.
Let's talk about those swing states because, as you and I have talked about for months now, is that this election is going to come down to those states. What do they think specifically about Vice President Harris now being at the top of the ticket?
Well, the swing state polling has President Trump leading President Harris by a stronger advantage than national polling. However, shifts in national polling tend to come before shifts in state polling. So, up until now, the most recent wave of state polling still has President Trump up, even though his lead has been cut. And again, we are in a moment where Harris has quite a bit of momentum. However, you could say that these are probably the best days that she will ever have, right? That her opponent doesn't quite know how to attack her and how to approach a new candidate. All of the focus is on her. She's coming out of $120 million worth of fundraising, mainly from small donors. So the base is energized and the focus is squarely on her. These are likely some of the best days that the campaign will have, or some of the most challenging days that the campaign will have. And again, Trump is still slightly up. So the odds are still with Trump. However, this momentum from the Harris campaign needs to be seen and analyzed closely. And again, if she's able to make the right calls on a whole array of issues over the next few weeks, then it might very well be that we see a very, very competitive race, or she might even potentially take the lead.
Pretty much instantaneously after we saw President Biden drop out, we saw the Democratic Party really coalesce around Kamala Harris. We saw this coronation around Kamala Harris. And if I was part of the Harris campaign, hearing you say these are the best days of the campaign, I mean, I would be feeling a little nervous right now. So she has this momentum. She has seen historic fundraising numbers over the past few days. She has been embraced by Gen Z. Can this last, A? And when do you think it will stop?
Well, 81% of voters across the country view that President Biden took to step aside from the campaign favorably and positively. That includes 90% of Democrats and 55% of independents. So that is, I'm sorry, and 55% of independents actually viewed the decision to appoint Kamala Harris as the successor in the campaign, right? So those two data points tell you everything. That while an overwhelming majority of voters in the 80% plus range favored President Biden stepping aside, when it comes to President Harris, right, she still has to make the case as to why voters should vote for her and why she deserves their vote. So, as I mentioned, 55% approve of Biden's decision to endorse Vice President Harris to become the Democratic nominee for president, and that's also 54% of independents, but it's not an overwhelming number. It's almost split. And so that's, that's a data point that shows that the campaign will have to do a lot to secure the vote. And overall, about 25% of voters still say that they have not made up their mind. That's a very important data point. With 25% or a quarter of the electorate still saying that I'm weighing my options, then there's a lot of room for movement in one direction or another.
Do you think because there's so many people who now are undecided that the VP pick matters all the more? Because historically, the vice presidential pick doesn't really help a candidate, but because of the historic nature of Kamala Harris's candidacy here, do you think because she has such little runway left between now and November, that matters all the more?
I think that the vice presidential pick from the Harris camp can matter on a state level basis. And again, you hear rumors of the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, or Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, being on a potential short list of candidates, and that's because both Pennsylvania and Arizona matter amongst swing states. That said, on a national level, it's unlikely to really change the numbers and help her that much, leading us to that old quip in American politics that a vice presidential candidate can only hurt you, but rarely do they help you, or do they help move the numbers on a sustained basis.
Within her speeches over the past few days, we've seen her talk about abortion. We've seen her talk about Gaza, saying she will not be silent on the suffering in Gaza. What issues is she winning on, and what issues do voters care about?
Well, again, it's uncertain yet what issues voters care about: the inflation, they care about economy and jobs, and they care about immigration first and foremost. These are the top three issues, and that hasn't changed at all. That's why I think the next few weeks will be very important from the Harris campaign to speak to voters in the terms that they want to be spoken to, not necessarily in the terms that the core of any one of the parties wants to speak to them. And an issue like abortion, it can energize Democrats to come out and vote, but it's not enough. It's not an issue that's front and center for most Americans right now, and therefore it will have to be broader, right? She will have to compete on a broader array of issues than just abortion.
Dritan, those were pain points for President Biden during his re-election campaign. Inflation, the economy, and immigration. Trump was winning on all of those issues. Because Harris was Biden's number two, or is Biden's number two, does she inherit those same problems, and how does she distance herself?
She inherits all of the same problems, and again, what remains to be seen is, will she move to the center and try to win moderate voters, swing voters, independent voters, undecided voters, especially in this environment when 25% of voters say that they might still change their mind and they're still listening to both of the candidates? Or does she move further left and panders to the hard base of the Democratic Party? A lot will depend on the decision that the Harris campaign makes over the next few weeks. And again, we'll be tracking it very closely.
I do now want to flip to the other side of the race, Trump and J.D. Vance. As you said, a vice presidential pick rarely helps, sometimes hurts. Is that the case with J.D. Vance? Because we've seen a few missteps here on social media with his comment about Diet Mountain Dew. We saw resurfaced comments about calling Democratic leaders cat ladies if they don't have kids. I mean, is he dragging down the ticket?
I would say that the spotlight is not on JD Vance right now, and these are, early gaffes that are being picked up more by the media than by the general electorate. The big question that voters will decide on in November is who is more qualified to serve as president. And right now, when we ask that question and put, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, don't know as options, 44% Trump say it's Trump that's most qualified to serve as president. 41 say it's Harris, so she's behind by 3 points. 11% say neither, and 5% aren't sure or don't know. Ultimately, voters will vote for who's at the top of the ticket first and foremost, majority of the time, if not all the time. And this is really what needs to be the focus of the attention over the next few weeks. How does Kamala Harris reintroduce herself on the issues, especially given that she inherits uh, unhappy electorate on a whole array of issues, especially when it comes to inflation and immigration. That those are two key issues or core battleground issues that we have to keep an eye out on.
Drayton, per usual, I always appreciate the numbers. Thank you so much for coming on and breaking them down with me. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Brittany.